beautiful country, and they probably have snow today.
They've got snow. I saw some wonderful pictures from up in the central Ontario, Haliburton area. Lots of snow there today. I'm sure the West is experiencing the same.
Well, Canmore, I see Canmore with us. I'm sure they have snow in Canmore at this time of year, as I recall.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can hear from Mary, but the pictures we saw of people trying to get across the country during the holidays because of the storms
Yes.
out west was something else. Back to Zoom. Well, again, as everyone's joining us, we will encourage you to try out the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Let us know where in the country you're looking in from. And Dr. Mary has just stepped out to get a glass of water, and we'll get started in a moment. Bill, maybe we should get them to give us their weather forecast for their communities as well. See who's got the cold. Oh, Brenda in North Carolina. I don't think she's experiencing the cold that the rest of them are across the country.
I don't know. I heard that Canadian cold front was getting down pretty south in the States. So she may. Oh, 49 degrees and sunny. All right.
There we go.
Yeah. In North Carolina. That's not warm for North Carolina.
No.
Because that's the 49 is Fahrenheit. Yeah.
We've got Calgary, snowy Beaver County in Alberta, Lethbridge, North Carolina, Erickson, Calgary, Canmore. Okay, wonderful to have you all joining us. I am going to start recording this for future. Okay, and now that we've hit the top of the hour, I do want to welcome everyone for joining us on this holiday webinar that CARP is presenting, part of our ongoing educational series. We're focusing today on adult immunizations, vaccinations, and dealing with cold and COVID flu during this holiday period. And I want to welcome Dr. Mary Szabo. Dr. Mary, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. And actually, guys, thank you so very much for providing me this opportunity to talk about the topic in which I'm actually very, very passionate about. A little information about myself is I'm actually a family doctor practicing in Calgary, Alberta. And my passion and the clinic's passion is actually preventive medicine. So I am very grateful that you guys give me the opportunity, and thank you for people who are attending the webinar, taking time to know something about this flu season, which I truly think is a very special flu season, not from a good point of view, but from a nasty point of view. So if you're okay, I will proceed with my presentation.
Well, I did want to just add that my colleague Bill Van Gorder, the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Policy Officer at CARP, is also on the line with us today. Should we have any advocacy-related questions related to what you as a patient can do to help advance the advocacy work that we do on behalf of patients? Yeah. And Dr. Mary, I was also reading your biography about your time in the Canadian military. I thought that was an interesting part of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, we actually spent some time, we are emergency doctors as well. And we spent some time in the Middle East, especially during the Iraq War and the Twin Tower falling down. We just moved to Saudi Arabia about 10 days before that event. And we saw the Twin Tower falling down. We thought that Arnold Schwarzenegger has a new movie. So we finished our shift and my husband said, no, Mary, it's not the movie. It's not Arnold's movie. It's for real. And it was dead silence. And we moved our family. My youngest was about 11 to Saudi Arabia to work at the emergency there. And we were just sitting in our room, just dumbfounded about the Twin Tower following. And shortly after that, within hours, the 16 kilometer around where the embassy is was closed. And the hospital basically call for a meeting and say, you guys can go home, but we're really stubborn people. So but most of the American and British doctors left except for the Canadian staff. So we stuck it up and we went through the invasion of Afghanistan. Then we went through the Iraq War. And it was tense. And, as a Canadian, we come from a really safe country. And being immersed into a threat of war and doing emergency physician, you also worried about chemical warfare from Iraq. So we learned a lot. So when we came back and then the bombings occurred in Saudi Arabia, and all these stuff occurring, and we learn a lot of how it is to live in a high-risk political country. And then after we know what we got a lot of assistance from the US Army, and we really appreciate the military help and advice. So when we got back to Canada, we decided to join the Canadian Military Reserve as a medical officer. So the funny thing is we're not exempted from any of the basic military training. So at age 50, we joined the 16, 18-year-old in doing our basic training. And the captain who runs the basic training said, I say, boy, doctor, you guys are the oldest one I've ever trained. And they were taking bets whether we can still go through or dropped out, but we're two stubborn people. So we finished the basic training with a 16, 18-year-old, the basic military training. And then we go to the officer training and then we get posted. So my husband went to, during the Afghan war, they went to serve the country. And then, so going from there, we decided that, at least there's a little bit of things that we can contribute to our military. And we have lots of troops who actually went there and then they came back and we take care of them. So it's a very rewarding, event. So we loved it.
Thank you very much for that story and for your service. It's wonderful to have that background and sharing that with our audience today. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, it's our honor to be able to serve our country, really. That's the least that we can do at our age and with our profession. So
well, and the motto here at CARP and at Zoomer is the best way to keep going is to keep going, and to have
right.
50 somethings in basic training. That's inspirational to all of us for sure.
Yeah, I think I have the 16-year-old Conrad call me grandma. But we had fun, and it's really nice to see the young people are really, once when they train in the team environment, they're fantastic. They really run around doing what teamwork is all about. And the military is really, really good in team training. So we learn a lot too.
Well, we have our own small battles to fight this winter with COVID and influenza. So over to you, Doctor.
Okay. So thank you very much for people who are taking this time to actually attend. I really very much appreciate the opportunity from CARP as well. So basically, nice. For some reason, okay. So winter is coming. A lot of us think of winter as a very pleasant season. We think about winter sports. We think about Christmas, family gathering, all the good things which are associated with winter. But there's one thing we always forget is actually the seasonal cycle of respiratory viral diseases, which includes the common cold and influenza. And it hits human population like a clockwork, right at winter, and it happens. And we ignore them because most of the season we went around with it and it's not too bad. We get a little bit sick but that will be fine. But this year is actually really very special from the point of view for what happened for the, during the pandemic and as well as the ongoing COVID-19. So people ask me, why is winter so special? Why does it cause this epidemic? And partly is because the severity and the transmission is because of environmental factor. During the winter month, it's much colder, the weather is much drier, the virus is actually much more stable. And, and depending on the virus, whether they are the bad ones, doesn't match the vaccine, or people, the host in which we are much weaker in terms of our immune system, such as our senior population. And human behavior is, this is a season to be jolly. We all like to gather. And so the close proximity really promote the transmission of the disease. And vaccination is actually the very, very best preventive medicine. And infectious disease is actually very, very good prevented by vaccination, and it's very effective way. And both the government and NARCI basically say, preventing influenza during this flu season is a very, very important strategy to make sure that our healthcare system is not overwhelmed and being tremendously strained during the pandemic. So a quick review on what influenza is about. A lot of my patients get a very confusion about the common cold, the COVID-19, and as well as influenza. So I decided to throw this slide on to sort of a general review. So the flu is actually a viral respiratory infection, which can infect your nose, your throat, and your lungs. That's why people have a sore throat and they will have coughing and sometimes shortness of breath. As it's predominantly a viral disease, and there are actually 4 influenza virus, A, B, C, and D. But the one which is causing up a lot of troubles are the influenza A virus and the influenza B virus. And as you can see that they have lots and lots of relatives and they change their hats. And so that's a reason why it comes back every single year to haunt us. B is actually pretty good. You only have 2 lineage. And so they are not too bad, but they can cause pretty serious disease. And usually they see that it is actually disease of the younger people. A mainly is with adults and older people. And so depending on the host, and also depends on the virulence of the virus, it really depends whether a person have a very mild symptoms or very, very severe symptoms or even death because of that. So this is just to summarize. A lot of my patients will ask me, cold is well known. People just have a sniffle. A lot of my patients ask me, say, Dr. Mary, do I have COVID-19 or influenza? And I said to them, it's so hard to tell. And you can see this tick mark everywhere between COVID and influenza. And if you can see that, I used to be able to tell my patients, say, if you lost your sense of taste and your smell, I can guarantee that you have COVID. If you don't have it, you probably don't have it. Well, I was wrong now because the newest strain of Omicron 5, which is a branch off of the Omicron 5, doesn't include, the loss of smell and sense is not a common thing. So you're left with, these 2 indistinguishable. Okay. So why is the flu so bad? A lot of people say, hey, Dr. Mary, it's just influenza. I would just have a few days in which I'm getting sick and I stay home, they'll be fine. Those are the ones which I see generally between, 18 to 45. But as you can see, the disease burden internationally, worldwide, every single year we have 1 billion cases of flu. That number is most likely underreported because a lot of people get sick, especially in the developing country. They don't see the doctor. They just stay home, or they don't get tested because the resource of testing for influenza is not there. And 1 billion cases recorded, and 3 to 5 million people who have seriously ill influenza. And influenza attributing death, you can see, is between about 300,000 to 600,000. Now, nationally, this is just the tip of the iceberg, which I show. Every year, we have about 2.5 million confirmed cases of influenza. That is just the tip of the iceberg because people who get sick don't get tested. So that number appears very low, but in actual fact, it's very, very high. And out of that, you have 12,000 hospitalization, and you only have about 3,500 deaths. But this number is also underestimated. So a lot of times we said 3,500 deaths is because of influenza. However, if you go up to this side of the slide, as you can see that people, can have lung effects from influenza. You can get pneumonia and bronchitis. And what they do is some people die from a pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, but that might not be included as influenza death. Or some people who have asthma, who have very, very severe asthma, so it can affect the lung. But if you go over to the other side, you can see that some people can actually have a heart attack shortly after influenza. And there is one study actually published by a Ontario scientist and published in New England Journal of Medicine, I think around a couple of years ago. And he actually showed that 2 weeks after people who have respiratory illnesses, especially the flu, people suffers from a heart attack. And I have a personal patient who has a heart problem. She got the flu. However, she has complication from the flu. She was admitted to the hospital for 5 weeks with an abnormal heart rhythm, worsening of the heart failure and all the joints. And she was staying in the hospital for 5 weeks and then another 5 weeks in rehab. So the burden of the disease, especially for the vulnerable, the senior, as well as people who are immunocompromised, is just not a simple case of muscle aches and pain. So I want to impress on you guys that it's not a simple thing, and we need to pay attention to that. We don't talk about the financial economic impact of influenza until the COVID-19. And you can see the absentee time taking off work is there. And so it tends to interrupt productivity. And we see that very, very clearly with COVID-19, which now has impacted the economy with supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So if you, between the two lines, you will actually know that the combination of these two viruses is not a great thing. Okay, so this slide just basically summarizes that, senior bears the bluntest and the heavy burden of the flu because they account for 70% of the hospitalization and 91% of the death. And if you take a look at StatCan, by the time that 2040, the number of seniors are going to be increased. So the cost of healthcare and the strain on the healthcare system is very real. So we will need to actually get our senior protected from these kind of infectious disease. We all like to age this way, gradually and at home. And if you take a look at the Statistic Canada of the senior population, 92% of our seniors still stay in their own home. We like to be that way. However, if you're one event of your health, you spiral down and you lost your independence and you have to go to nursing home and assisting living, and none of us want to do that. So preventing influenza will be able to allow us to actually age gracefully. So people say, hey, I have a lot of students say, hey, why are we so special? And I say, we're so special is because we get wiser as we grow older. However, our bodies also age. So you can see that there's a concept of immunosenescence, which is associated with age, which by what I meant is that as we grow older, not that you have more wealth of experience, but your immune system is also aging. So they are not ready to respond to any kind of infection. So the risk of infection when you are 65 and older is much higher, and you get much more severe disease as well, complication from the flu. And there is also an association with the chronic disease with influenza related complication. And as you can see, as we are senior, we have a lot more chronic disease associated with us. And the statistics that by the time we're 65, about 30% of the Canadian senior will have at least one chronic disease. By the time you're 75, that number go to 2 out of 3. So you can see that we are much more fragile as we grow older and predispose us to severe disease as well as complications. This slide just to summarize that if you have heart condition, you will have a greater flu attributed mortality as well as for lung. And if you have double whammy, your chance of getting, the influenza attributing death is about 20 times than those people who don't have it. So as I said that because we are aging, our immune system is actually quite weak. So the ordinary vaccine might not help us to prevent influenza. So there are special vaccine which has been created with senior in mind. So this is the NACI equivalent to the CDC of down the States for the recommendation for senior or 65 and over, and is to be say if you can get the high dose flu vaccine, it will be much better. But if you don't have it available, please still do vaccinated, and as long as whatever flu vaccine is actually provided for you. So people sort of say, hey, flu vaccine is for the oldies. No. Flu vaccine is actually for absolutely everyone, and especially for the high-risk individual, which will include the very young, people less than 5, and senior. And then you also have nursing home staff because they are much higher risk for severe disease, and people actually taking care of family members of senior, because if they get influenza, they see the family members, they get sick, okay? And then of course, community like nurses and policemen, we could not afford for them to get severely sick so that the services is going to be interrupted. Pregnant ladies is another one because if they get the flu, they have increased chance of miscarriage and everything. And also indigenous people and people who are younger than 65, but they're chronic disease, they also have increased risk of an infection as well as complication. So my family and myself love the Christmas Carol, and we actually will see it either on TV, Netflix, or actually on the play. So when I was preparing for that, I say Christmas Carol is stuck in our mind. So why don't I present the flu in terms of like, Christmas Carol, okay? So Jacob Marley from Australia, what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere usually can help us to predict what happened in the Northern Hemisphere. So the Jacob Marley from Australia, their flu season usually started in April and ends in about August and September. And if you can see in terms of that, you can see that in this graph, you can see that this is this year flu season. It peaks really early, and then they usually peaks at about August and September, and this year is actually in May. And you can see the yellow line is actually the 5-year average for influenza, and bingo, it goes up. So when I present this to the pharmacists, I said to them, this is what is to come. So please get people vaccinated. And I would suggest that vaccinated them as soon as you get the vaccine to blunt this so that we will prevent to have this peak. And so, that was the message. And I think the co-op pharmacy was very good in that. So now that we know what happened to the Southern Hemisphere, we were preparing for that. So what happened in the past? Okay, this is the kind of the history of influenza that a lot of people don't actually know about it. Influenza is basically not a new kid on the block. And way back in Hippocrates, he also noticed that there's an annual recurring upper respiratory tract symptoms, which seems to peak around every single winter solstice. And so is not a new thing. And then in 1300, when the flu epidemic hits Florence, Italy, they didn't know what was going on. So they just dubbed the disease as influenza di freddo, which is, the inference of the cold. And that's how we get influenza. And if you take a look at the past epidemic, you can see that it occurs every century. And for the 20th century, we have about 4 pandemic, which I can show it to you. And the 4th pandemic, the interesting one is since 1918, we always have a pandemic almost, on the clockwork. And if you can see that, with every single pandemic, the virus is supposed to retire. But for H1N1, it doesn't seem to be retiring. And so you can see that H1N1 caused 1918, and then it also causes 1977 epidemic, and then the 2009 pandemic. And so this is the reason why we call H1N1 as the mother of pandemic, because it causes 3 epidemic and pandemic, and that is very unusual. Okay, so what happened to the Christmas in the past? And this is the Christmas during the Spanish flu, and I don't know whether you guys can see that or not. Even the cat is masked. Okay, so this is the Christmas during 1918. And everything was canceled, and the 1918 pandemic is the worst pandemic that human population have ever experienced. It killed about 50 million people and infected 500 million people in the world. And it mostly hit younger people, 20 to 40. And that's why when it started, fairly shortly, 3 weeks after pandemic started, 1,100 soldiers actually has fallen ill, and majority of the soldiers die fairly rapidly. So it's not a disease which is only for the old, and it can hit the young really quickly as well. So this is to show you in terms of in the past, you will really appreciate it. It looks like clockwork. I want you guys to pay attention to this gap here. This is unusual, okay? So that's what makes the flu season so interesting this year. So there is absolutely no influenza cases. This is from WHO, from the world. There's nothing. Okay, and it is a gap. So there is no influenza in the year 2020 to 2021, and there's a mild season for the following year, 2021 and 22. And look at this flu season here, very early, and it peaks, and it's far more than the 2009 pandemic. So if you move over to the Canadian national data, you can see it just like clockwork, every single season you have, and depending on the vaccination rate and the strain of the virus, you will see the peak depending on the viral activity in the virus itself. So now what is happening? As I say in the beginning, this season is just so interesting in the sense that, we have a perfect storm. So this is a repeat slide, basically getting you guys to pay attention during the pandemic. Low flu season for the past and absolutely none during the pandemic, okay? This is the current status of the flu activity in Canada. And you can see that this is very early on. We don't see the peak flu season not until January, February. Look at these highlighted in purple. Okay, this is basically, going widespread. So in Alberta, we're seeing widespread of influenza, long lineup for the ER, admission and hospitalization for children is increased. With time, I would expect all these provinces to catch up very, very quickly. Okay. And then if you take a look at this, I'm ahead of my time. So if you take a look at this side here, this is basically to show you the average time. This is the peak of where we are now. These are just the number of tests being done during the flu season. Look at the 2020 to 2021 zip, none. Then this is the past flu season, and this is the average 5 season. We are looking at the Jacob Marley of Australia. Flu season occur really, really early in December, and we generally peak around, January or February. We peak very high and attack really very quickly. So what are we looking at in terms of the strain? And if I can show it to you, okay, another mirroring the Australia data. Influenza A is almost 100% of the cases in all age group, which is really unusual because we usually see influenza B infecting the younger people, but look at influenza A all across the board. That's unusual, okay? And then if you move forward to the other, so what kind of A? We have 2 types of A, H1N1 as well as H3N2. And usually the younger people don't get H2N3, okay? It's only elderly people. And it's a much more severe strain of the influenza strain. But Lord behold, look at this data in Canada. You're seeing majority of these cases are H3N2. So you're seeing that people are actually getting sicker when they're young, all right? And the next slide is just to give you the curve, impression of how it looks. So this is actually, the flu influenza illness like, and take a look at the curve again. Very early peak and outrun the 5-year. Okay, so we're seeing Australia pattern. Okay. And then another slide, this would just give you a present, an appreciation of hospitalization. And take a look at this. You can see this is the young, less than 5. This is 65 and over. This is the average. You can see that the young and the old are the one who has most hospitalization, but you also see the other age group climbing up as well, all right? And then the next one is just to give you what happens to, I get a lot of people, especially younger parents, who will not organize or immunize the children. Under 18, they just don't think of it. Oh, they're young, they don't get sick. But look at the statistic. You're seeing people, young babies and people who are infant and who are toddlers. Look at the hospitalization rate. This is unusual. We don't usually see, and that's why our children's hospital is jam-packed. Emergency is outrageously, very, very busy, and people get admitted to the emergencies through the emergency into ICU and pediatric ward. And we're at the brink that we're very close to being overwhelmed. Okay? And so this is just a curve to show you appreciation from the graph of how hospitalization from the younger age group. So this is the Calgary statistic. I just want to point out that low flu season, fairly late for the previous season, simple during pandemic, okay? And I'll show you why this is so significant and why this season is so interesting. So when we don't see, this graph is actually worldwide. This red line is immunization testing rate, sorry. And this is actually the influenza incident in 2020 to 2021 season, 2 seasons ago, flat line, okay? And so people will say, well, you know, fantastic. We don't have influenza to worry during the pandemic. So is the lack of influenza pandemic a good thing or a bad thing? A lot of people will say that's good because I don't have to worry about it. But in actual fact, it is not a good thing. We have to become very vigilant after when all the masking is done. And so what it does is it creates what we call an immunity debt. And the immunity debt is actually coined by the French scientists. And they find out that immunity debt is caused by a lack of exposure of regular bacterial viruses, which is circulating in the environment. And all the measures that we do, personal restriction or flying, masking, 6 feet distance, help to prevent that. But the thing is, when people, especially young people, don't see the virus, their immunity will not get waking up. So they become dormant. And then when everything basically crashes, there's no restriction and influenza start to circulate again, then the peak all occur. So it's not a good thing. The immunity that causes that, the younger people don't allow the immune system to practice. And now 2 years afterwards, when influenza virus is really active, they get sicker and they spread like wildfire. And every single year, the match of the vaccine in the vaccine effectiveness, it really is based on how good the vaccine is. And if you don't have a lot of circulation, WHO will not be able to find a good match. But according to the Australian data, it is still a good match for the H3N2. And then when all the restriction comes down, nobody wear masks, flying, traveling is all, coming back, you create a really perfect storm for this flu season. So now this year, we don't have this guy here alone, okay? This is influenza. This is coronavirus. And this is respiratory syncytial virus, in which the children will have them, but if they circulated last year, they will not be getting very sick. So you have 2 good friends attack on our old friend here this year. That makes it a perfect storm for a tri-epidemic. So the other thing, besides those big 3, you always have all these other viruses which also circulate and make us sick. And when you have one disease, you lower your immunity and you're more susceptible to that. So besides having the top 3, you have all these viruses which is also circulating as well. So what happened to COVID? My patient said to me, well, Dr. Mary, when is COVID going to end? And I say, bad news for you, COVID will never end. Let's hope that will behave like a flu. It's still going very strong. Right now, India is battling the 4th wave again. And on the news, China is basically one rampage with COVID-19. It's not because of they lower down the restriction. That peak in that pandemic wave has actually started when they have the lockdown. And what is actually predominant in India as well as in China is an Omicron 5 mutation of BF.7. And this strain is so, how would I say, we do not, the data is too early as yet as to see how serious they are. We hope that it's going to be milder, but it has an incredibly high infective rate. So we usually refer the infective rate at R value. So the R value for the BF7 is really very high. And so measles have a very high thing as well. So it doesn't take much for the virus to actually infect people who are who are exposed to that. So this is just a graph to show you how things are going along. You have your influenza B virus, which is holding on a very low profile. And you can see the respiratory syncytial virus. It started very early on. And you have the COVID-19 still going very strong. You can see the influenza is very, very powerful and very early on. Okay. So what do we Canadians can do to stop this disease, right? And as I say in my previous slide, vaccination is your best friend. It's the cheapest and most cost-effective way of preventing it. So if I show you how well do we actually do in Canada, and that is only up to about the flu season of 2019 and 20. People who are 65 and over, they win the jab. Okay, challenge. And so they are at least 70%. The target vaccination for people who are 65 and over, WHO, Canadian Health Canada is 80%. So we're still shy of the 80%. But look at all the other ones. They are at most about, I would say 40% nationally. That was before. You move it over, this is actually in Alberta. Senior does really well, but it still has not hit the target of 80%. And then, the older than 65, and these are the C2 senior graphs, 65 and over. I want to point you to this. This is the universal, the common Albertan, and it's sitting at 20. And the last data that I just checked, we're doing better. We're doing 25% now. And you can see every vaccination in all age group is very low. Okay, so that's not a good thing. So we're not actually doing our part to actually contain it. If we can contain influenza, we can deal with the other viruses. So what we're not doing very well. And this is nothing new. This is actually year after year after year, this is the immunization vaccination for flu is like. So this is the top 3 reason why people don't want to get vaccinated. Okay, so as you can see, it's mostly, oh, I am healthy. I have a lot of say, oh, Dr. May, I don't need that. I'm young, I'm healthy. It won't die, okay? But they forget that they have grandparents, okay? And they visit their grandparents during the Christmas holiday, and they have young children, their friends, young babies, and people who are under 5, they're all high risk for complication. So you can see over and over again, I'm very healthy, I'm very healthy, I'm very healthy. The other thing is I did not get around to that. I did not get around. I'm too busy. I have to go do my shopping, etc. So those are the top 3 reasons why people do not want to get vaccinated. Now, these are the myths about flu vaccine or vaccine in general, okay? And I hear about them, and they would say, one of my patients say, Mary, why do I need to be vaccinated? I let other people vaccinate, they will protect me. And this is what we call herd immunity. But bad news is, herd immunity is unless you have a threshold number of people who have been vaccinated, and they will prevent transmission, you're prevented. But the average vaccination for the flu vaccine is low, is about 30% if it's not. COVID-19 is a little bit better, but the thing is, as the virus mutate, you will need more and more percentage of people actually get vaccinated to protect other people who cannot be vaccinated for the COVID. And now with the mutation, even though you are vaccinated, the vaccination is not a bulletproof, it's not a shield force, to protect you because of the mutation. So we don't have herd immunity, so you need to be jabbed. And then so say, oh, I am okay. I already have the booster. I'm good. Okay. I don't need the flu. Okay. So I'm protected from one nasty virus, and flu is okay. I'm fine. And some of them is say, well, I understand, but I don't want to get sick, But the thing is, they don't understand it. People can get co-infected with the flu and COVID-19. That's bad news. They get very sick. They can die from it. Or else they say, oh, I'm young, I don't get the flu. And then say, hey, I already have COVID already. I don't need the vaccine. If you take a look at the research, which is very robust from New England Journal of Medicine, as well as, Health Canada and NACI, unfortunately, the vaccine is not 100%. And so the vaccine is only good when there is a good match. And so the now bivalent COVID vaccine with the original Wuhan virus plus the Omicron 4 or 5 will give you a little bit better protection than the original series. But now with BF7 and also BQ1 and BQ1 and 2, which is the relatives of the Omicron 5, you need that vaccine to protect you. You need the booster, okay? And so, and with the newer Omicron, which has not been affected Canada as much, but the US is seeing them more and more one, which is a branch off from the Omicron 5. And what is scary about that is that mutation actually reduces the efficacy of the treatment with the biologics when you do get 19. And so for people immunocompromised, that is not a good thing. So you don't want that to take over. And the other thing is, hey, I don't need to worry about the flu, as the flu season is very low. You remember the gap I showed you guys? People look at the gap, Mary, why are you so hang up on that? We don't have any flu. What are you talking about? Bingo, yes, we do. Okay, so those are the myths. So this is the spirit of the future. We are heading into a tridemic, which is a triple epidemic, which is respiratory syncytial virus, COVID-19, and the flu. And you can see the headline in terms of say, okay, it's all over the news now. We're overwhelmed. People don't come to the emerge, okay? And, and the hospital basically sort of say, we're overwhelmed. Please don't send our resources is really strained, okay? And these viruses is not the gifts that we actually want for the holiday season, okay? So the future is gonna be like, okay, you don't want to see these headlines over and over and over again. And there will be headlines, young people dying off, and we're seeing a tremendous death in during the flu season. So what can we do? Okay, as Anthony said, what can we do? Get vaccinated, even though the vaccine is not 100% for the flu and not 100% of the COVID, at least you get vaccinated. One thing that the media did not address is they will look at antibody level to the COVID-19. And once when you get infected, your antibody actually wanes with time, about 4 months, 5 months. But the cellular immunity is still very robust, okay, and it still protects you. So by getting vaccination, you might not have very serious effect. You might have a sore throat or a runny nose. I have a lot of my seniors actually have COVID-19, but they are very mild. They might have a little bit of muscle, they might have a runny nose for a couple of person, and none of them need to be admitted. The only one who need to be admitted are my really, really immunocompromised people, like the kidney transplant, the cancer people who are on treatment. So what we can do as a Canadian to help Canada out is to get vaccinated on the vaccine which is available. We don't have any vaccine right now for respiratory syncytial virus, but we're hoping that Pfizer is working for a vaccine for RSV for adults, but that's going to take about 5 years down the road. We stop the spread of the disease by practicing, how would I say, personal protection, masking, keeping a distance when you're indoor, mask, etc. That is very helpful to prevent transmission of the disease. So what's the take-home message? If is remember, influenza lives with us every single year. How good, how bad it is depends on what action that we take. Okay, imagine especially getting vaccinated. If all of us get vaccinated, then the pain is going to be a lot less instead of, overwhelming the healthcare system or getting your relatives very, very sick and dying from the flu. Senior, we carry a high disease burden. So if your granddaughters, children, if you see them, if they want to see you at all, you need to know they need to be vaccinated because you don't want to get sick. Because if you get sick, all of a sudden, even though, you're living independently before you get sick, when you get sick, bingo, you go to the nursing home. And so convince your family to get sick. And if they don't, I'm a Gestapo for that by saying that, you need to wear a mask when you come and see me, okay? And there are also, people tend to forget that there are also other higher risk individuals who are not seniors, such as the very young, babies less than 6 months cannot be vaccinated. And, children less than 5 years are at high risk, pregnant women are at high risk, people with chronic disease are high risk. So these guys can get more severe influenza and complication. So if you have friends, relatives who have that, do your job to protect them by getting vaccinated, okay? Because it does reduce the transmission and the infectivity of influenza infectious disease. If we do the jab, we will actually prevent our healthcare system to get overwhelmed. Healthcare worker burned out is all over the media now. We're all burned out. Everybody is leaving, and we're not a happy camper. And I see a lot of my colleagues genuinely are exhausted. And some of them have been put on COVID units, and they're very happy for the fact that COVID-19 is settling down, but they're burned out. So they're so happy to go back to their own specialty. And while we were doing the pandemic, we do a lot of virtual care, and we see people who are getting sick, and we can't shut shop. Okay, vaccination is the best prevention, and please protect yourself, your colleagues, and your fellow Canadians by getting the jab or whatever vaccine which is available. And that's it I have, and thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mary. That was a top to bottom informative presentation. I learned so much. I'm sure everyone on the line did as well. I want to encourage anyone, if they had a question, to put it in the chat box. And Mary, one of the first questions that came through was from someone who had the traditional flu shot, not the high dose shot when they arrived at their pharmacist. That's all that was available. Now that there's more in stock, should they consider getting the high dose flu shot as well?
It's, as I show you from the slide, not all provinces will have the high dose flu shot covered. And I think Alberta is one after quite some time in which we actually convinced the government base they do that. So if you can get hold of the high dose, get it. But if you don't have the high dose, still get the standard dose, even though your response to the vaccine is not robust. Now, this is my personal thing, is not scientific, and no recommendations say you can, how would I say, you shouldn't or you should get it. So for my senior, especially for the nursing home residents, I have actually instances, especially for nursing home residents, in which they were given the standard dose. I would say, hey, our clinic would give you the high dose and sort of give it a boost, but there's no scientific support for that. So I would say that's an off-label use, so as to say. So if it is my grandmother, if they have it and they are really frail with a lot of multiple, medical condition, I would say, sure, get the high dose. But is not supported by NACI. There's nowhere in the found of the scientific evidence to say what I recommend it. So it is a discussion, it's a very personal discussion to discuss between the family doctor and the patient. But congratulations, you still have got the jab.
They've got the jab.
Yeah.
Bill, CARP has been quite engaged in the advocacy to have provinces across the country pay for that higher dose flu shot for seniors. Where do we stand now across the country?
Well, we still have 4 provinces and territories that don't have the high dose flu shot available for people, and we're of course, as Dr. Zebo has said, we are encouraging that to happen, that everybody over 65 should have the ability to get the shot that is recommended by NACI, and NACI is the go-to information for the best available. So we want everybody who's 65 plus to be able to get that. It's too late for this year. If your province isn't offering it at no charge, it means if you want it, you've got to pay for it. But this is the time that provinces are doing their budgets and making plans for ordering, and ordering the flu vaccine generally happens in March of the year. So now is the time when your elected representatives are in your ridings to talk to them personally, give them a phone call, get in touch with them. We don't suggest email because emails often get ignored, but make a personal contact with them and say you want high dose available to all people over 65 in your area.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Bill.
I think Alberta has been approved now for anybody who's 65 and over. And I know that we have been working very hard to convince the government. And I personally was very impressed and happy with our government for approving that, because cost barrier is definitely a barrier to getting the right vaccine. But if you cannot get the right vaccine, at least get the ordinary vaccine. And if everybody do their part, let's say about herd immunity, so people younger than 65, or younger people, if they all get vaccinated, you have herd immunity to protect our senior relatives. So.
And Dr. Mary, if you've convinced someone to finally get off the couch and go get their flu shot this season, it's not too late, but can they get their COVID booster at the same time?
Yes, they do. They can. So NACI recommended that you can get both jabs at the same time, okay? And we recommend that we do them in our clinic. We give the bivalent in one arm, and then we give the high dose of the flu shot in the other. And so it's not prohibit that you need to separate the two. Some places will say, hey, I don't want 2 arms to be sore, then we can separate it. Or separate the 2 jabs by 2 weeks in order to have your immune system work properly to handle one vaccine. But if you know that if you have kids or grandkids, the grandkids all get 5 in one shot. Okay, the immune system is actually designed enough to handle more than one. So the answer is a yes. And if I see people emerge and if I can convince them to get both jab, I get my nurses to do that. And same with my clinic. I get them when the iron is hot. So when they walk out of my clinic, I know that both of them have been vaccinated.
Thank you. I know that you talk about preventative medicine and preventative measures. CARP has always advocated to our members that being healthy and staying physically fit and doing everything you can to maintain your own physical health is important. But it's not something that can be relied on when it comes to COVID and
Mhm.
influenza. Vaccination is part of that preventative combination.
I like to see vaccination as like, I'm a Star Trek fan. I don't know whether you guys are Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
You know how the Enterprise is protected by the shield, and vaccination is our shield. So if your shield is strong, it would take the enemy a lot harder to break through the shield to causes damage to the Enterprise. So no vaccine is 100%. There are some vaccine which are very good. They are about 90-something%, like the Shingrix vaccine, tetanus vaccine, and all those other ones. But because the influenza virus mutate every single year and they have so many relatives, they can choose to change a hair color, one of them, and they decide to be the dominant ones, it will evade the vaccine. But the thing is, if you get the vaccine every single year, you build up a library, volume, so that the reason why H1N1 doesn't, when the pandemic occurred in 2009, most of the people are younger people because they've never seen it. For older people, they have seen H1N1 before, so they are not as sick as than the younger relatives. So my feeling is still get the vaccination, even though it's not 100%, but you have some amount of shield to sort of help you to sort of say, I won't get as sick. Okay.
But the more natural remedies of the vitamins and et cetera that are claiming to boost the immune system, they can't fight that natural body immunosenescence.
No, they won't. The immunosenescence for the senior composes of the way the immune system changes. So not only do they don't react, the immune system stays in the bone marrow and the lymph tissue. So when we're exposed to disease, the immune system will basically goes to work and build specific antibody to that particular invaders. And in senior, that response is way blunted. Okay, so let's say if I give vaccination to someone who is 30 and give someone who's 75, the person who's 75 can only amount 30% the response to the vaccine. And so this is the reason why now they're doing vaccines especially for the senior. There are also vaccine called recombinant flu vaccine, which is basically produce the vaccine by recombination of the viruses. And that one has 3 times as much antigen than the standard dose. And that one has been approved recently by Health Canada to be given to people who are older than 18. So for people with rheumatoid arthritis, people who have chronic disease, as I say, sometimes they are high risk, so the standard dose might not cut it. And then we would give, the doctors or the pharmacists can get them for the recombinant. I think it's called Sutempic. And but unfortunately, it's not covered by healthcare, so they have to pay out of pocket for that. And some of the immunocompromising disease of people who are on biologics who actually causes your immune system to be blunted. The research are very limited with the use of high dose in those populations, but it has been done. There are few studies, but the studies are actually really quite small. I do give people off-label use high-dose flu vaccine if they're on biologics or if they have cancer, etc., and I give it to them. Okay, so those are the softer indications. So you have to talk to your own family doctor about it.
We have heard of the monoclonal antibody treatments for those patients who are immunocompromised. We're doing some education work on that as well.
Yeah.
But we know their ability to deal with some of the newer variants have proven to be difficult.
Yeah, especially for the BQ1 and BQ1.1. And for people who are immunocompromised, that's really a bad news for them. Not only they're very highly infective, but they're totally useless for those two strains. And we're seeing the Omicron 4 and 5 is still fairly strong in Canada, but we're starting to see the Omicron relatives, which branches off from Omicron 5. The BQ1, and 1.1. So we're slowly seeping in. So let's hope that they will not dominate, okay? But, places like India and China is just, is really ugly. And so.
I'm coming to you from Ontario, and we recently had an announcement from the province that pharmacists could provide Paxlovid as a response for seniors who tested positive at home for COVID-19.
Yes.
Is that same situation in
Same
Central Canada?
with us. Paxlovid used to be controlled by AHS, but the government very quickly released it to the pharmacists, and family doctor could use that for people, especially for people immunocompromised of cancer, biologics, etc., and senior, can get the Paxlovid, 5 days of Paxlovid, and we all have to do is just write the prescription, and and the pharmacist will dispense it. Most important thing considering that is that there is a window of 5 days. Okay, so if you are sick and you don't know whether it's the flu or the cold, please have yourself tested. And if it's negative, you repeat the test again in 24 hours, okay? So that you are within the window of treatment, because after 5 days, it's not effective. So do them and phone the doctor and making sure that the window is within the window of usage.
Wonderful. Well, we've gone a little bit over our time. Bill, did you have a question for Dr. Szabo before we tune off?
No, I think she's certainly covered it very well. And I just want to add my thanks to you for the presentation, Doctor. And I know that this will not only was appreciated by those who watch, because I've seen the comments thanking you coming up now, but I know that many other people are going to appreciate it also. So thank you very much.
Well, you guys are very welcome, and thanks again to CARP for giving me this opportunity to share this, because I'm very passionate about it, and as a Canadian, whatever we can do to prevent transmission, we're doing good for our government, and for the community.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much to all of our members who tuned in. We will be sharing the link of a replay to this video with everyone who registered, and it will be posted on the carp.ca website. Thank you all. Happy holidays. I hope everyone has a safe and happy new year.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Doctor.